Hey, Sopranos fans, welcome to the first ever Machiavellian Monday here on Sopranos Street. In this series, we will be evaluating different Sopranos characters based on how Machiavellian they are, and we will be starting with Johnny Sack. Now, Machiavelli's book, The Prince, is known to have had tremendous influence on mob culture. It's referenced a few times in The Sopranos, although usually in relation to Sun Tzu. It's practically quoted in A Bronx Tale, and even Carlo Gambino is known to have referenced Machiavelli's Lion and the Fox example as one to be followed by leaders. But Machiavellianism is actually much more specific than many people know. It's not just a general notion that you should scheme your way to the top and that the ends justify the means. It's essentially a how-to-rule manual for current or aspiring leaders, detailing the most effective ways to deal with specific circumstances and different types of people based on Machiavelli's historical observations. So when evaluating different Sopranos characters, I will be looking at how they acted in certain situations and with certain people compared to how Machiavelli said they should act, and not just deciding who was the best schemer. Now, one quick second before we dive in, if there are any Sopranos characters you want to see evaluated in this series, please let me know in the comments. Also, there is no need to mention Tony. He will be one. And with that, we're on to Johnny Sack. When evaluating how Machiavellian Johnny Sack was, we will do so primarily through four aspects. First, his conflict with Carmine Sr. Second, his conflict with Little Carmine. Third, his actions after becoming boss. And lastly, his interactions with New Jersey, which is where things get really interesting, especially if he was actually trying to push his way in eventually, despite claiming he had no desire to stick his beak in. While the conflict with Carmine Sr. was a minor one that didn't really go anywhere, it did show us a few things. Machiavelli said that there is nothing more difficult to take in hand, more perilous to conduct, or more uncertain in its success than to take the lead in the introduction of a new order of things, because the innovator has for enemies all those who had done well under the old conditions, and lukewarm defenders in those who may do well under the new. Johnny Sack found this to be true when trying to recruit Tony.
You're not going to be happy. I'm out. Well, whacking a boss is bad for business.
The risk-reward just wasn't there for Tony, and he wouldn't go through with it. Now, while this may be just a general observation, there are two things that must be pointed out before moving on to the more significant conflicts. First, the causes of tension between the two that led to this point, specifically Johnny Sack's moving to New Jersey.
I didn't know you were moving to Jersey.
Yeah, Ginny wanted to be near her sisters, schools out here.
We were sitting with Carmine all night long. You never once mentioned you bought a place in Jersey.
Well, it's not Carmine's favorite subject, me living in Jersey, but it's what, half an hour, 40 minutes over the bridge?
Now, while his move to New Jersey was certainly a very minor source of tension, I do have to mention it here, not just because it plays into Machiavellianism, but because it's an issue that will pop up again later in this discussion. In regards to Johnny Sack's house, or as Machiavelli would have called it, the Prince's Fortress, it was said that it could either be good or bad, depending on how it's perceived. If perceived poorly, for whatever reason, as was the case with Paul Castellano's White House, then it becomes a source of animosity and can be more harmful than helpful. So in this instance, due to the friction it caused, Johnny's move to New Jersey was not Machiavellian at all. But we'll get back to that later. The other aspect regarding Johnny Sack's level of Machiavellianism becomes apparent during the conversation between Johnny and Tony regarding Carmine.
The Esplanade now. I wish for Carmine's own sake he'd ease off.
Why should tell him that?
I'm telling you now. Carmine won't bend.
His emphasizing that Carmine won't budge, but he is more realistic, falls right in line with the Machiavellian strategy. Although Machiavelli was referring to somebody who is already in charge, is being attacked, and it's not a perfect situational parallel, the strategy of installing fear of the enemy while also slyly separating you from boldness is employed almost to perfection by Johnny Sack. I also think it's important to mention here because, like the other point, it will come up again later, showing this to be his MO rather than some instance of situational necessity. Now, this conflict with Carmine Sr. may not have ended up amounting to much, but the one with Little Carmine after his father's death would prove much more significant. In this conflict with Little Carmine, multiple Machiavellian strategies are employed, or ignored, generally to great success, although not entirely. Johnny Sack's overall approach was very Machiavellian. He acted swiftly, as opposed to Carmine, who was more cautious, And according to Machiavelli, with a few exceptions, fortune favors the bold. He said, "For my part, I consider that it is better to be adventurous than cautious, because fortune is a woman, a lover of young men, because they are less cautious, more violent, and with more audacity to command her." But even taking a more detailed look, several strategies show up. Machiavellian maneuvering would dictate that Johnny Sack eliminate threats promptly and install a stern governor, which is exactly what he did when sending Phil Leotardo to rough up and later kill Lorraine Caluso for not kicking up to him.
I gotta nip this little Carmine shit in the bud. Otherwise, I could see a lot of people start fucking around. Power vacuum, the capos buy their time, nobody's sure who to pay, so nobody gets paid.
But his reaction to the death of Joey Pepys, while understandable, was not Machiavellian in either the way he handled advice nor the actions taken afterward. According to Machiavelli, a prince should only accept advice from a select few, and even then only when asked, as well as let it be known when somebody shouldn't even be offering advice at all. In this aspect, John is semi-Machiavellian. He makes it known when somebody shouldn't be offering any advice.
It's a shame then you can't find a way to work things out. Give me a piece of bread, huh? Have you thought about this? Maybe you let him keep Lorraine, and you take a bigger piece of his Florida shit, the clubs.
If I wanted to worry about Florida, I would move to fucking Miami. You know, it wasn't long ago I remember you used to wait in the car. And as far as I'm concerned, you should still be there.
John, he was just
Fuck,
trying...
he was just. Everybody's got a goddamn opinion.
But he also takes advice from Tony without asking.
You want my advice? You go out there, you shake his hand, and you put this fucking shit to bed.
A Machiavellian response to that would have been to shut him down immediately and let him know that when you want his advice, you will ask for it. But the killing of Angelo Gareppi in response is where things really get interesting. Considering a war had just started and Angelo was most closely linked to Joey's death, since Tony mentioned him specifically during the meeting about Lorraine that preceded all of this,
Angelo Gareppi came to see me. Lorraine Caluso reached out.
killing Angelo may seem logical, but it is not Machiavellian. In fact, according to Machiavellian strategy, of the three main opponents, Carmine, Angelo, and Rusty, Angelo is the only one that should have been allowed to survive the conflict. When conquering a territory with leadership based on heredity, it is imperative that the old family be eliminated entirely, so little Carmine should have been killed. And when dealing with their people, you must look at the reason for their resistance to determine your course of action. If their resistance was due to courage, then they should be allowed to live, because if you can get them on your side, you have gained a courageous ally. If they resisted because they're ambitious, then they can never really be trusted and should be killed. Clearly, Rusty was the ambitious one of the bunch.
I'm telling you, Carmine, we go all out, we'll steamroll right over John. And I predict the guys in the street in Brooklyn, Queens, they'll welcome us as fucking heroes. It'll be easy.
And therefore he should have been killed. But as it was, Carmine backed out while both he and Rusty were still alive and left Johnny Sack the boss. A perfect example of Machiavelli's assertion that those who rise due to family name will have an easier time attaining but a harder time keeping, whereas someone whose rise was due to ability will have a harder time getting but an easier time keeping. As ruler, there are several things Machiavelli said you need to do, all of which we see John doing in his meetings. 1, you have to show in your dealings that your judgment is irrevocable.
Here's what I propose. Tony gets 150. 25% comes from you. The other 75% of that comes from Hesh.
Jesus Christ, that's like 40 grand. You gotta be fucking kidding me, John.
Am I smiling?
You have to support your people.
Look, I'm not saying you're wrong. Phil treats nickels like manhole covers. Believe me, I know. But the captains loyal to me need to know I stand behind them right now.
And leave matters of repercussion, at least in terms of public appearance, to management, which allows the ability to separate oneself to a degree from violence and perceived boldness.
I want you to promise it'll be quick.
I'm not going to lie to you, Tony. I don't have to. Phil's going to do it. And he'll do it his way.
Not only did Johnny Sack execute those things to perfection, but he also acted in a very Machiavellian way in ending the conflict. According to Machiavelli, a prince ought to be violent at first, but then only when it's to an obvious benefit. He also notes that if too much force is required to maintain an area, it becomes more an expense than a benefit.
Look, you want to shut down our joint construction jobs? Eat K rations, fine. You want Phil to put one in one of my guys? That's going to go a long way to making you the rich prick that you always wanted to be.
What do you suggest?
Well, whatever his legitimate sorrow, he's got a price. He wants to provide for his family.
And?
And what? Read his price.
Johnny Sack realized this as well and put an end to the fighting. Unfortunately for him, it was immediately before he was arrested, but during his incarceration, 2 more principles come into play. First is a callback as to how he should have killed Rusty, but didn't, and now it come back to him.
He'd like you to do him a favor, though.
What now?
Our friend there, the mayor of Munchkinland, John wants him gone.
And the other is regarding troop morale. Machiavelli said that you should be mindful of the troops' morale, for they can leave you hanging or seize what you seized from you, and that is exactly what we see happen to John after his daughter's wedding.
John?
His troops' morale plummeted.
I'll tell you one thing, and I'm not ashamed to say it. My estimation of John Sacrimoni as a man just fucking plummeted.
And he began to get pushed out of the picture entirely. But for the most part, Johnny Sack acted in a very Machiavellian way during his time on the throne, so to speak. When moving on to evaluating Johnny's interactions with New Jersey, a couple of things pop up. First, while his house in New Jersey may have been very un-Machiavellian if he had had no intentions of sticking his beak in, if he did intend on pushing into New Jersey, moving there would have been a necessity from a Machiavellian standpoint. When moving into a new area such as New Jersey, you must be on the spot, which he would have been in New Jersey. You want to allow them to live by their own laws and customs as much as possible, which we never got to see. You must ruin the old leadership and turn the old influencers into friends. In regards to ruining the old leadership, asking Tony to do the hit on Carmine Sr. could have killed 2 birds with 1 stone.
If I do it, what do you do for me?
I take a sad song and make it better. With the other families as regards you. It's smart to have reservations. But there's differences between this and Castellano.
While he claims he can take a sad song and make it better, he said right before that the killing of a boss is what they fear most. So how much of a difference could he have made since it had not been a sanctioned hit beforehand? If, however, Johnny just let Tony kill Carmine and then denied any involvement, Tony would have been killed, thus leaving Carmine and Tony dead, with Johnny ready to assume their spots. As far as turning old influencers into friends, Johnny Sack was always trying to be on friendly terms with New Jersey, coming to their small card games despite the enormous ones he's bound to have had access to as a high-ranking New York gangster, but specifically he seems to have taken an interest in winning over Ralphie and Paulie, although neither panned out. Interestingly enough, though, Paulie's reaction when he realizes John was playing him is exactly how Machiavelli said that sort of situation would play out. He said men will willingly change rulers hoping to better themselves, but will switch back quickly if deceived. So at the end of the day, I think Johnny Sack was an incredibly smart and fairly Machiavellian individual, but not entirely. Well, that does it for another episode here on Sopranos Street. As always, please like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you at the next score.